Welcome to the Talent Equation Podcast. If you are passionate about helping young people to unleash their potential and want to find ways to do that better, then you've come to the right place. The Talent Equation Podcast seeks to answer the important questions facing parents, coaches, and talent developers as they try to help young people become the best they can be. This is a series of unscripted, unpolished conversations between people at the razor's edge of the talent community who are prepared to share their knowledge, experiences, and challenges in an effort to help others get better faster. Listen, reflect, and don't forget to join the discussion at thetalentequation.co.uk. Enjoy the show.
Welcome to another episode of the Talent Equation. I'm excited about this next conversation because I managed to be able to pin down the world famous Russell Earnshaw, who has managed to find an hour or two in his schedule where he's not driving from one end of the country to the other or sending thousands of emails. Rusty, good to have you on the show.
Thanks for having me, and that was £10 well spent on your intro music. I enjoyed that a lot.
Yeah, Radio J, I'm indebted to him, so big shout out to him because he does a great job. And anybody wants any voiceover done, then he's the man. Hey, Rusty, good. Like I said, it's been a while getting us on because, our schedules haven't made it happen. I'm really glad we can have this conversation. Lots of stuff to talk about. We can go in all sorts of different directions. I think the starting point for me, and we just said this before we even started recording, was you just used a phrase which I think I'd like to use as a starting point, which was about not putting the software of today on the kids' hardware. What do you mean by that?
Well, it's interesting. One of the first questions I often ask ex-players is, what position did you play? If you were a back, did you go into a forwards meeting? If so, how often? And so we got a generation of players who the backs never went into forwards meetings, or the high numbers never went into the low numbers meetings, and vice versa. And so we had this. We'd already divided the team up. So I'm always a little bit confused by that. I think the difference between us and the best team in the world is the fact that they are connected up, and it's difficult to tell who their low numbers and their high numbers are. And so if we continue to coach as we have done, and that would be a glaring example for me, having half the team in the meeting and often the guy with a 10 on his back not in that meeting, and he's possibly in charge of running the game, then we're not going to allow these kids to achieve their potential. So I think we should be, talking about anticipation and deception and awareness a bit more, and understanding that if I'm playing with you, Stuart, I need to understand what it is that you're good at, and how I can best support you, and what are the areas that I might need to help support you with. I think we need to think of players as coaches, not as players. It would definitely be easier if we had 30 coaches on the pitch. I'm just thinking that perhaps the game of the future is going to look significantly different to the game as it does now, and maybe just the people. We talk a lot about the All Blacks, and certainly we'd want to be ahead of them, not following them. However, some of the stuff they're doing in the game at the moment, the way they're not kicking for goals, and the way they're playing, they're just exploring the game. We got to start thinking a bit more like that, in my view.
Like an excited puppy, I've just jumped straight into talking about all this kind of stuff. But what I neglected to do is actually get you to kind of talk a little bit about what you do and kind of where you've come from and what your backstory is. Because I think a lot of people out there may know you, and they'll know that you're talking about rugby because that's sort of your day-to-day, but a lot of people might not. So it might just be worth having that as a starting point, and then we can come back to what you just said.
I imagine lots of people are hurriedly Googling me thinking, who is this imposter? So I work at RFU. I coach in the pathway with England 18s, and I support coaches in that pathway as well, and a little bit beyond. My backstory is I was at school. I watched the varsity match. I thought that looks quite cool. I'd like to play in that. Decided to work quite hard in my A-levels. Went to Cambridge, Played a bit of rugby there. Probably my favourite rugby ever, to be honest. I often talk about Tony Rogers as the guy who was more concerned with the golf ball and the peg and the drinking game, so we coached ourselves. And it turned out pretty well. We had some fun times and some, some really nice performances. I then went and played professional rugby. I possibly felt pretty constrained by professional rugby, if I'm honest. Coached in England Sevens with Ben Ryan a bit. Took 2 years out. Became a teacher. Taught economics for 2 years, which is cool. It's great fun. And then came back in. This job came up. It's my dream job, so I've been doing that for the last 2.5 years. I get to work with some great people and more importantly, some pretty exciting young players who just awesome to coach them.
You're right at the coalface of this, and you're working really, closely with a lot of coaches. What are the challenges that you're seeing emerging within coaches that you work with on a sort of daily basis?
It's a lot of coaches. There's one challenge. A real large number of people who possibly don't know what they don't know, but actually once I think we were talking earlier, we had one coach come in and he said, it's like I've seen fire for the first time. So I think our job really is to spark their curiosity. I think once we've got that, you would struggle to find many coaches that don't have good intentions. In the same way you would struggle to find many parents that don't have good intentions. So I think our role is supporting those guys and girls. I guess one of the challenges is that there's large numbers. So what we're trying to do is create much more coaching communities where people can share and learn off each other and observe and go into each other's environments. The Magic Academy, so our online stuff has been pretty popular. We got about 1,300 coaches on there from Premiership down, so that's kind of helped solve that. We've set up academy development officers in each club, although I would like to call them academy coaching wizards. Apparently it's not allowed. But yeah, just trying to get people who are wizards in different areas that can, influence other people. So it's pretty challenging to say, well, we got 4 or 5 people and we can influence everyone. We're just trying to create more and more wizards. What are the challenges? Competition, the perception that you need to win games, often not the case. Ego. So we would have, we would interact with, not really with too many of the coaches that we're working with, but people who it's about them and it's not about the kids. So helping those guys as well is always a great challenge.
So in terms of this issue around ego, I think it's an important one. One of the main ways in which a coach can be demarked as successful or a good coach is their record. Generally speaking, coaches who are getting appointed into different roles, like become head coach of a club, wherever, they get appointed because they've had a win, they've had a promotion or a series of promotions. So, of course, the idea of winning being associated with good coaching is pretty wrapped up. But in a talent development context, often it's the opposite. So, for me, what do you think kind of are the characteristics, or what sort of earmarks somebody for you as being a potential wizard?
It's a great question. And we could talk all day about what we mean by winning. Our best coaches would be curious. They'd be very self-aware. They would be willing to try stuff and fail and get it wrong, and be willing to be vulnerable in front of their players. So they think individually. They think longitudinally. They're not constrained by a result at the weekend. They see it often as just another training session, it's another opportunity to learn. And I think you're right. Often one of our challenges is a lot of our kids win a lot of games. So if you're in an environment where you win all the time, and we had one example of a kid who'd won 120 fixtures on the bounce, well, that's not a particularly good development environment for him because, well, the learning pit that followed the losses was fairly significant. So actually having those deliberate bumps, having deliberate challenges, starting better players on the bench, playing them in different positions, setting them challenges within games so that they're playing games within games are all solutions to, that I think a lot of people are obsessed with winning. I was with a guy the other day, Richard Shorter, who works with parents, and he just said, your questions demonstrate your values. And so I always tell my mum off, first question, did you win? Second question, did you score? Third question, did you get man of the match? That's what she thinks is important. If I said to her, look, would you prefer results, winning, or character from your grandson? I know which one she'd want. In reality,
but that's you've touched on something there, which is about this societal challenge that I think we all face, where environmentally we're very results driven. Media is very results driven. When it comes to the way we fund sport, it's always about results. So even in a participation space, there's results in terms of numbers of participants. In the elite space, it's about medals or it's about trophies and all these sorts of things. So when it comes to sport, we've become very results focused. And whenever you have a conversation with somebody and you talk about the potential downsides of competition from a player development perspective, often you get met with some pretty vociferous responses in terms of people saying things like, well, you're just anti-competition, you're kind of watering it down, you're basically a tree hugger. So, I mean, how do you navigate some of that? How do you help coaches to kind of stay resilient in the face of what can be some fairly overwhelming cultural challenges?
Yeah, and look, and the reality is the same. A lot of these kids that we're working with in their schools, it's exactly the same. So if you look on their Twitter feed, it gives you a pretty good measure of what's important in that school. So, and they're often talking about the 5% of the kids who are getting A stars and rocking it in sport. What do I think? I think the competitiveness, our best players would all have that. They would all, I think it's something you can develop. I think it's a skill. If you came into an England 18s camp, you would see lots of scores being kept and people set challenges against each other. As well as I do, the problem with competition and I'm a Sunday morning dad, so when the mighty old Bristolians under 14s rock up and the opposition have left 10 players at home because they want to win a game, then it's the adult behaviours that go around competition. When we've got parents on sidelines giving instructions to kids, or the little kid sat on the bench for the entirety of the game. Well, that's the downside of competition. And we're not playing in a league or a cup. We're just playing a game of rugby. However, it's just the adult behaviours. It's the parental behaviours that follow on from it as well. And like I say, everyone has good intentions. They possibly just don't realise that they're not necessarily developing all their players to be people and help them find meaning in their lives, which is ultimately why we do what we do.
I don't want to. I mean, I'm not going to overly dwell on competition, but I'd be interested to get your views on this. I think there's something about competition and competitive people. And I think let's face it. I think a lot of people who come into coaching, particularly like you and me, Sunday morning dads. We do so, we're generally speaking quite competitive people. And as a result, sometimes formal competitive structures can be quite seductive. I was talking to a friend of mine the other day. He's chairman of a local football club. And he's really, really keen. He wants me to come and do some work with his club because he's really keen to try and, build a really kind of player-centered philosophy within the club. And really bought into the idea of kind of equal game time and this, that, and the other. And I saw him socially, and he was telling me about how they were playing a game that morning, and there was one young lad on the sideline, and he was on the bench. He said, "Right, you get warmed up. You're going to be coming on last 15 minutes." And they were losing 2-0, and then all of a sudden they scored a goal, and it was 2-1. And his coach that he works with, his kind of co-coach, said, "No, he's not coming on now because we could draw this." So this boy didn't play any football that day, And the rationale was, well, it's a league, it's competition, it's a bit more serious now. They're a certain age, and actually we've got to do it that way. And I had a long conversation about that. I'd be interested just to get your views on that.
Yeah, I'm definitely feeling sorry for that young kid. He's possibly going to fall out of love with sport pretty quickly. Why would you come back? Look, we've had it in rugby. We've had guys in our environment really who've released kids from. They play with their mates. They rock up on a Sunday, and the coach turns around and says, "You're not good enough." I mean, that's blown my mind, if I'm honest. I've been trying to think of it more positively. So last weekend we played with Broad Plain. I'm going to give them a shout out. So I'm going to St Brendan's and Gordano, and with us Old Bristolians. And I gave all the coaches a nightclub clicker. And the coaches got a point every time they gave a positive to another kid from an opposition team, and they'd give them a reason why. They got 5 points if they could get a kid to do that to another kid. I think that's a really useful skill to have, to be able to give positive feedback to other boys. Often boys like taking the mickey out of each other. The best behaved parents got an extra 20 points on the liquor. If any parent was misbehaving, and we talked about what that might look like, and the coach kind of went over and had a word with them, they got 5 points to that. And then we just played some games with the condition that if it got more than 2 scores apart, the coaches would even it up in some way. The kids would do their own subs anyway, and each player was only allowed to score 1 try in 1 game. So the big kid who's often running over people, then sometimes his players might start supporting him. And afterwards, we then pulled all the parents in and pulled the kids in and the coaches and just said to the kids, what did that feel like? What was it? And they just talked about it being this brilliant atmosphere. We could try stuff. It was great fun. And well, I just used competition amongst coaches. And they were really competitive, the coaches. They wanted to get the most clicks. And I think the most clicks was, I think Gordano got, Mr. Mowbray from Gordano got like 220 clicks. And he's high-fiving kids, and he's giving real support to opposition players, and the parents are being super positive on the touchline because they want to get 20 points. So I think we could reframe it. It's tough, isn't it? Because, I often have these kind of similar conversations to you on a Sunday morning, and in the background, my wife is going, for God's sake, be a dad, not a coach. But if someone comes up to you on a Sunday and essentially kind of challenges your coaching or your parenting, then you're not going to have a positive reaction. So I think we need to reframe it and think about other solutions to the problem.
I've actually just got some nightclub clickers myself, but mainly just to enable me to keep score of training games, because I can never remember. But I'm going to get some more because I think that's a fantastic idea, and I'm also going to take shares out in the company that makes them, because I'm pretty certain that this is going to be the most popular thing on Amazon.
They're going the same way as headbands, apparently. And I've just been giving the coaches when we've done, coach evenings, and just said, look, go and find creative uses for these. So John Fletcher the other day said I got 9. It was 9 really poor questions that I asked. One of the mums when we were up in Yorkshire said I got 60 times I heard people laugh. Someone else had 16 in the England South Camp, which was number of times that they saw players actually solving problems themselves in the moment, tactically, rather than an intervention from a coach. So just thinking of, well, if we could objectify stuff, if we could quantify some interesting stuff, what would it be? And the coaches have been brilliant at coming up with, what Coach last night was talking about, every time I want to intervene and I don't, I'm going to give myself a click, and then I'm going to look at whether or not the players solve the problem.
Yeah. That's fantastic. I think it's actually quite an interesting kind of equipment constraint, almost not even a constraint. It's just a way of using equipment almost within coaching that actually can manipulate behaviour.
And it's also helped my daughter get significantly better at maths.
How?
She's just learning like numbers that are in the thousands. So she's like clicking away, and we'll go, add 10. What number have you got? And she'll go, click, click, click. This is how much I love you. 40? That's not much. But it's just got her curious about numbers, and so she'll walk around the house with it. It's a bit like About a Boy or something, and she's kind of clicking and counting stuff. And it's just because it's something she can touch.
Yeah.
It just seems to be working with her.
Brilliant. I love that idea. I saw that you'd done that on Twitter, and I thought that's a brilliant idea. And I've been exploring the idea myself, because I give a lot of points out for various things. Like I give fail points out quite often, which is, if I know a player has been working on something, like a particular move or something, whatever it is they're trying to succeed with, and they have a go at it and it doesn't work, then I'll give a fail point out, and then I'll ask the players afterwards, kind of like, why did I give that point? And then they'll have to come back to me and say, and try and work it out. And I did that within an environment because I had a group of kids who were really, really unprepared to fail. They either peer pressure was such that they felt like they couldn't fail. They were from an environment where failure really wasn't an option, and you had to do kind of things in a certain way because, of course, we wanted to try and get a result at the end. So I think clickers for failures or things like that might be an interesting exploration.
Yeah, nice. I mean, I often talk about, and that's a really good way of framing it. We would talk about perhaps decision making.
Mm-hmm.
Was it a good decision, and then separate that from execution. Google have, a four-letter word beginning with F, cards. So if you don't use them, when you do your PDR annual, if you haven't used your F-up cards, then they're going, well, why haven't you used them? And it's just a different way, as you've done, and you've just reframed what I would call learning, so trying stuff and exploring, and it's just a different way of reframing it, rather than as, when I ask practically every kid in the country, have you ever been banned by a coach from kicking, then I'd say 99% of them have. So there's two solutions potentially there for you as a coach, and lots of others. And one is to ban them from doing it, and the other one is to actually support them with it. And yeah, that's what you're doing. That would kind of make sense to me.
I think that's something that, with the constraints-led approach to coaching, to use to get a bit technical, I suppose. It's one of the things I think a lot of people are just beginning to explore in more details, because there's two ways of doing this, isn't there? Like you say, you can restrict somebody in a certain way and stretch them in a certain way, or you can reward them for a different kind of behavior. They're both, I think, appropriate ways of getting people to explore different decisions within a game context. But they also have different pros and cons associated with them. And I think the restrictive approach tends to be the default people use. Like one I get all the time is like, in a hockey context is 3-touch, which I'm never a huge fan of, because I think that takes away a decision. The decision might be, if you've got loads of space, it might be run with the ball. So I feel like you need to explore different ways of drawing people's attention to certain behavioural opportunities.
Yeah, and in rugby, that's the kicking is the classic. So if you're a low number, so if you play in the forwards, then you've probably been told never to kick a ball. And so when I speak to Premiership second rowers and say, how many times you kicked the ball in your career? They often say once, and they often say either a coach shouted at me or my players shouted at me. I asked someone the other day, I can't remember who it was, and they said Francois Pienaar laughed at me, so I never kicked it again. And often it's the reaction of other people. So I would often be stopping the session going, hang on, so Johnny's just kicked the ball. Was it a good decision? Yes. Was it poor execution? Yes. How's he going to get better? By practicing it. Well, Johnny, how do you feel when all your teammates laugh at you when you do it? So I'm always a bit, I would talk a lot about learning environments. A good learning environment would be people would be willing to try stuff and not get judgment from their peers. So for us in our world, it might be that you can score a try. However, if you score through kicking, it's double points. And if it happens to be a guy with a low number that scores through kicking, then it's quadruple points. Because actually, we almost want to amplify that, because our context is we are coaching kids to play to have the software of the future, and in the future, hopefully, every player on the pitch will be able to kick. Because if everyone can kick, then it actually opens up more opportunities to pass and score, because the opposition have got to put players in the backfield. So my preference would be, and not to take stuff away, but to play around with scoring systems. So we might have our best kicker. So, who, if he does a kick to score and it's off his good foot, it's just a point. But if it's off his less strong foot, then it's double points. Just for him to go, well, he has the opportunity to do both. However, we might make him aware of the fact that there's other opportunities with you by using his other foot as well.
I think that's a really interesting idea, isn't it? In the sense that, I mean, I think coming right back to where you started there, and I think this is really, really important in terms of the culture. Is so if people are ridiculed for trying something for example, not executing effectively, then they're going to naturally veer away from doing that again. It will actually probably put quite a deep-rooted sort of emotional response to doing something wrong that then will mean that they'll just go through a risk aversion or a failure aversion scenario. I think that's really important. And what you described there, going back to what you said about Google as well, where what Google are doing is almost saying, if you're not messing up, you're not trying hard enough. And I think
yeah. And what they ended up with was lots of people rocking up and them going, well, you haven't used your cards. And they go, look, we tried to use it 10 times, but they turned out to be really good ideas. So I can only apologise for having 10 really good ideas. But I wouldn't have had otherwise.
Yeah, you're almost like, I'm desperate for them not to work, yeah. But I mean, that's in the military, my understanding of the military, speaking to somebody that we both know, Matt Parker, from his time within rugby, and I see Matt quite often at my office because he's working within the English Institute of Sport in an innovation role, and he was saying to me that within the military they expect like an 80% failure rate when they're creating some sort of innovative new equipment or whatever it might be. That's innovation for you. You've got to have a certain number of kind of unsuccessful attempts in order to genuinely push things on. But I think in the world of sport, it's completely the opposite. Our expectation is, and coaching largely is driven by the idea of error reduction, minimize error, and therefore you'll be successful. And I just think it's a really regressive way of looking at coaching and human development.
Yeah, and our version of error. So
yeah,
that's also part of the problem. So it was interesting the other day, I had a coach say to a kid, oh, that was wrong. And it carried on. And then I kind of grabbed the kid and I said, oh, what are you thinking now? He said, I'm never going to try that again. So he just went, ultimate risk. I'm not even going to try that again. Well, then, if we're talking about creating players of the future, the players exploring what is possible within the game and within themselves, then we're not doing our job correctly if we start to create that kind of environment. And people like James Dyson and Thomas Edison, and they wouldn't have lasted 5 minutes in that kind of environment. We wouldn't have light bulbs. We wouldn't have Hoovers. How would we survive? You get stuff wrong, you learn from it, you iterate, you make it better. And if you want to be world leading, then you've got to protect that.
Absolutely. I mean, and this probably is a good jump off point to talk about some of the stuff you're doing on a day-to-day basis, because I know when I was working within the RFU, we spent quite a lot of time working through almost like, what did we want to do in terms of developing players, and it took us a long time, and there was quite a lot of back and forward and debate and discussion, as there often is in these kinds of player development rugby contexts. But the one thing we could kind of arrive on and agree on was this concept of cards. Tell us more about cards.
Yeah, look, ultimately we want skillful, adaptable players who are, and what we looked at around the research was some of the almost higher order skills that would help support them be world-class players. And there's some other stuff as well, but this would be our 5 kind of key ones. And that was creativity, awareness, resilience, decision-making, and self-organisation. And within each of those, we would look at how we develop those in people, both on and off the pitch, predominantly on the pitch, because ultimately that's the kind of their theatre. And it's helped the players understand a bit more. It's not just catch pass; it's actually lots of other stuff. So, so to look at an example, if me and you 10 yards away passing a ball to each other, we could possibly do it, and that, however, we might not be doing a great deal of awareness. So we haven't got any defenders, and so our decision on when to pass, which would be based upon a defender and a support player, and and actually whether or not to pass, because there might be space in the backfield. We're not actually developing that. So we would, a big focus on us would be around developing these skills, celebrating them, and to be honest, if for the kids that, and whatever it means, don't make it, I want the kids to love sport. I want them to keep playing the game and for as long as possible. And, whether that's at uni, whether that's for a third team, whether that's for a World Cup winning England team, I can definitely sleep at night if we feel like we've helped them as people as well. So I do, you wouldn't find many people that would argue with having kids that are creative, aware of themselves and others, resilient, good decision makers, and can self-organise. And there's probably resilience and self-organisation have possibly been the ones that I think are the areas where we need the most attention. A lot of the kids that we interact with, that would be the areas they would be the most developed.
It's an interesting one, isn't it? Because I think if you're, one of the things about this, I think one thing that's so powerful. Firstly, it's very memorable, but one of the things I think that's so powerful is if that's your starting point, if you're quite clear to say, that we actually prize, going back to your point about, giving points for things, if you prize creativity and you prize players that have awareness and actually show resilience in the face of difficulty, are constantly looking to make decisions and also, like you say, and then in order to do that, they're obviously got to self-organize. If you prize that's essentially the stuff that you're saying is what we want to do. That then challenges people who are creating environments for this kind of thing to develop to operate in a very, very different way. And I think it also requires quite a lot of almost like unlearning of the way they perhaps started themselves and the way they were taught and all those sorts of things. It's quite a challenge.
Yeah, no, well, yeah, and it's definitely a challenge for lots of people. So one of our, when we're looking at either adults or kids coming into our environment, we're often going, well, who's going to find this really hard? Who's going to find this easy? How are we going to challenge them? Who's going to find this hard? And it is unlearning. So I've been in a couple of schools recently, and they would have their own version of cards on their website. They would say, we want, kids who are gritty, who are the leaders of the future, who are whatever it might be. Well, actually, if they stripped it back and started school again and said, well, this is our output, so to say, well, it wouldn't look like it currently looks. So, however, the challenge with a school is how do you admit that and do a huge amount of unlearning? Because the reality is, if we wanted to develop resilient kids in a school, we wouldn't do a lot of the spoon feeding that we currently do for kids. We wouldn't celebrate winning. We might celebrate, as you have, failing and getting stuff wrong and learning. We wouldn't give a test back and go, you got 80%. We would go, there's 20% more you need to learn. So we would completely reframe it. And we possibly wouldn't be sat in specific positions, in classrooms, in rows, listening to a person at the front who's the fountain of all knowledge. However, that isn't going to change in a hurry.
But in the sports context, what I've found is, because obviously working as a coach educator in hockey, working with, both novice and more advanced coaches and some of the coaches who are, sort of at the sort of top end of the talent pathway. What I've picked up is there's a genuine appetite for this. There's a dearth of practice. There's a dearth of awareness of how to do this, but there's a genuine will to embrace this as a concept and to operate in this kind of way, which I think is a good thing from a coach development practitioner perspective.
Yeah, it's really, look, it's really had traction. I think a couple of reasons. One is that it actually gives coaches freedom. So often coaches feel a little bit like, well, I don't know all the technical stuff around the pass or whatever it might be, but actually it just gives them a little bit more freedom as well. And secondly, it just gives people something to hang their hat on. And I'll be honest with you, the kids loved it. We had T-shirts in South Africa for, the players decided who'd been the most creative on the pitch in the day, or who'd been the most resilient and why. And I'm thinking these T-shirts look terrible, but the kids are loving them. I mean, they can't take them off. And at the end of the trip, people got to keep the T-shirts, and they were really excited. And I was thinking, when are you ever going to wear that T-shirt? It's a terrible T-shirt. But the kids were just loving it. And it just became, I guess just part of their language, and it's really freed up my coaching. And I really also think when you sit in a session and you go, right, how are we going to look to help little Johnny with his resilience in a session? How are we going to look to help Big John, who's not used to passing or kicking, perhaps, with his creativity? How are we going to best support him? And then the other stuff will kind of follow from that, I think. So the catch passy, tackling-y type stuff. And clearly we're coaching that as well. So if we're seeing themes where we think we can support players, then we're definitely helping them with that stuff as well.
I'm just reflecting as you're talking, actually. So a couple of things just come to mind. I remember I did a session in a school recently. I was doing a session with some of the kids doing some work, and the staff were watching me work, and then we had a sort of Q&A afterwards, just to sort of say why'd you do this, why'd you do that, and all that sort of stuff. And one of the things that came out was they sort of said that they had this challenge with the expectations of particularly of parents and also senior leaders within the school, where results were really important and seen as being a kind of a benchmark for the school in terms of how successful the school was, and then its ability to recruit future students. And this is obviously a key driver often. And I said, well, what else do you do? I mean, you obviously publish your results, you obviously publish the top try scorers, you obviously publish the point scorers and all these sorts of things. I said, well, what else do you do? What else do you prize? What else do you share with them? And I got some blank faces. And I said, well, RFU has got cards. Do you ever have prizes for creativity? Do you have prizes for resilience? These sorts of things. And again, your point, like the point you said, it's like they'd just seen fire for the first time.
Yeah, even though it's on the front page of their website.
But there was immediately this thing it was amazing, but they were thinking, oh, how are we going to sell this to everyone? And I was like, well, surely that's the easiest sell in the world.
Well, I think it is, because my son's at school not to get results, but to help him become the best person he can be. And I don't think the two are mutually exclusive. I actually think one leads to the other. So I think if you had kids that could do all, if they were creative, if they were self-aware, if they were resilient, if they were good at making decisions, they could organise in a school context, they'd probably pass a lot of exams. They'd probably do really well in rugby. They might win some games. So I don't think the two are mutually exclusive. And it's, and we see lots of examples. So who do I think? Aidan McNulty at Newcastle Falcons does this. I'll give some shout outs to different environments, but does this unbelievably well. I would, I'm sure if anyone contacted him, then he'd have them in their environment, and I think he does it brilliantly. Pete Short, who's an ex-player who kicked the ball once in a game and passed the ball on average 8 times a season, has had an epiphany. He's seen fire. He's at Camford School, and they've changed. Yeah, they've looked at the Camford, and so for example, N is nobility. So when they do the school newsletter, they talk about the kid that's been the most noble. And so I imagine there's children putting jackets in puddles for other kids so they don't get wet when they walk across it, because that's what nobility is to me. And the Brit School, and, there's just so much. It's had real traction in school environments. And I think you're dead right. It's how do we influence parents? So that's why we've been doing a bit of stuff with Richard Shorter, who's a minister down in deepest, darkest Essex in Romford, and looking at how can we better influence parents, because the reality is they're the most influential factor in a kid's life. And if you're just dealing with things reactively and putting sticky plasters on them, then you're not gonna get there, if I'm honest. So I would have parents on the curriculum. I would support them better. I would support the teachers better in their interactions with them. And I just, and I've seen this happen. So they did it at Newcastle. And so Aidan got all the parents in, and some of the kids were there and the coaches, and they went, cool, we're doing cards. We want you to come up with ways you can do cards at home, at school, and at Newcastle, and in their spare time. And they also set the parents a challenge of building I think they had to build a house to protect some eggs or something. and the parents just came up with more solutions than the coaches had even thought of. And the parents were like, this is brilliant. And now, so what you now have is parents up in Newcastle doing cards at home. So they're not just rocking up to rugby and doing cards. The parents are a part of this as well. And they 100% have bought into it. And it's a huge impact.
So just drilling into some of the aspects of cards that I think, we've sort of touched on creativity quite a bit, but there's another area for me that I think is often talked about a lot of language used, but I'm not sure people have enough information around how they do it. So I'd be interested just to sort of practically get some of your insights as to the approach you do around this whole idea of decision making. Now, I know all 5 of these things are continuously interchangeable, so we don't take them in isolation because it'd be a bit reductionist, but just looking at how you develop or how you work with young players and help them to make decisions. I'd be interested just to get some of your thoughts and insights on that.
Yeah, and you're right, you can't separate them. So awareness leads to decision making. So in our world, awareness is just information. So what's the stuff you're looking for on the pitch in order to inform your decision making? And clearly, if creativity in our world is about solutions to problems, so if you start taking away solutions, then actually you're gonna reduce their ability to make decisions. So they are all interlinked. Look, it would be based upon the individual. So and it's our context. So the other cool thing for our kids is, well, they play in lots of different environments, so they might make different decisions in different environments based upon the players around them. So lots of stuff around, what's Stuart really good at? How can I best support him? So understanding that your decision making isn't reliant upon a system necessarily; it's reliant upon people around you and what their strengths are and what their weaknesses are. We'd play lots and lots of games where they get lots of opportunity to make decisions. They get feedback from the game. So I'm too flat. It's preventing me from passing. If they were struggling to work out, if they were struggling to beat the game, that would be something else, some language we would use, stolen from Newcastle Falcons. It sounds like we're sharing a lot of stuff. It's collaborative. Then we might just intervene. If we see themes with players, then we would have conversations with them. Getting them to observe other players. One of the things we've been doing recently with defences, so I personally think, and this is a hypothesis that I'm testing, that labelling defenders around rucks, so guard AB or pillar AB or whatever it is, limits decision making. So we're all aware of the guy who's often got a low number, who runs next to the ruck, puts his hand up and breathes a sigh of relief, that he doesn't need to make a decision and calls himself guard. And people got away with that for generations. However, the reality of the game is it's speeding up. And so your ability to get in there, breathe a sigh of relief and shout guard is getting limited. And everyone's looking for you. So the attacker looking for you defensively. So I asked one of our players, if you couldn't run in and say guard, what would you say? And he said, pillar. I said, you can't say pillar. He said, one. Can't say one. Or any label. He said, instead of pointing my hand up and shouting guard, I would point in front of people and tell people what I'm about to do and who I've got. And I was like, well, which piece of information would you prefer? I would prefer that one. So we've stripped out all our calls defensively and just gone, we're just going to talk about what we're going to do. And actually, we're going to be proactive rather than reactive. So we would talk a lot about deception. So there's another way we're changing decision making. So if you look at defence off a line out in the backs, often it's the same picture for the attack. And then the attack call a move and the defence react to it. Well, what we're doing is going, well, we're going to leave a really big hole for you there. And we're fairly certain you're going to go into it. But we're then going to do this. So we're going to actually play chess. But we're going to force you into a move. So I'm with you. It's quite hard to separate everything. We're doing lots of little things. So we're playing around with deception defensively. I think people are more comfortable with creativity and deception in attack. I think defensively we're very systems based. Phil Larder's still getting commission every time someone shouts guard, I hear. And so we're just taking it away and we're just playing around with it and seeing if it leads to better outcomes and And over time, if it makes our players better defenders, well, clearly it does. So the players that are low numbers and put their hands up next to a tackle or a ruck, as it pretty much now is, they're not allowed to be within 2 of a tackle or a ruck in England 18s training. Otherwise, there's a consequence to that. So they actually need to. So we're trying to support their decision making by putting them in completely different positions and then supporting them, because actually that's quite stressful for some of those kids. So I'm always aware that, you know, a potential unintended consequence of using a constraint or a challenge is, well, this kid's overwhelmed by it. It's like telling the kid in school who's currently on an E grade, you need to get an A star in a month's time. He's thinking, oh my God, this is impossible. So it's also supporting players through that process, because, you know, what is a challenge for us, and also is an awesome opportunity, is that, as I said, our kids are in lots of environments. So they'll come into schools, they'll come into academies, and there's a lot of transition going on, and they'll have lots and lots of different information in different environments. I think we're trying to simplify it down to, we're coaching through the principles of play, and we're using and we're trying to strip back all the language so that they can just play the game. And for some kids, that's challenging, because, you know, they've had a decade of standing next to a ruck, not being allowed to kick or pass, and being told what to do.
And I think it's interesting how we find ourselves with, you've got these players who, like you say, have been told what to do, but also I've noticed something, and this is where the decision-making piece is interesting for me, is I think there's, for me anyway, I think there's a real lack of awareness in players. Certainly my experiences within hockey, I see this sort of time and time again, where kids essentially just are really, really reactive. I'm not saying that's necessarily a bad thing, in the sense that, you know, sometimes they're sort of taking in information on the fly, but they're not really making decisions because they aren't aware enough to be able to have enough information for them to be able to make a decision. They're purely and simply just, if you like, being kind of knocked from one defensive one defender's attempt to try and steal the ball from them from the next, and if they get through by virtue of the fact that they've got some sort of assimilation of techniques that kind of enables them to do so, then brilliant, and, you know, wow, and that's great. But they don't really know kind of why that happened. They probably couldn't replicate it again if they sort of, you know, saw it again. And so that's the one big thing for me around, you know, helping to develop decision making, has been this whole focus on raising individual awareness as to kind of what the problems the game are opposing are, what the problems the defenders are proposing, what the problems the attackers are proposing, and sort of dynamically trying to get the players to become aware of some of those things, so that they can they can solve them together and solve them individually, you know, almost at the same time.
Yeah, and I would argue that guard AB reduces awareness, because lots of people will deal in black and white, and they'll say B has to take first receiver. Well, what if first receiver is 20 yards wide? Well, not then. Well, what if first receiver is 3 times? Well, not then. Well, why? And kids will take what we say as adults relatively literally. So it's no surprise to me that lots of 9s and 10s are making lots of line breaks, because actually it's relatively flawed. I mean, yeah, and we would play lots of tactical games, and we changed it to beat the game, because we weren't feeling that tactical was resonating with the kids. So it'd be lots of problems, and they would have to find solutions, and then we might talk about how they found the solutions, how they problem solved, and really it's not about us solving problems in huddles led by coaches. It's about players solving problems in the moment. And so it was interesting. Yesterday I was at Harrow School, and I really enjoyed this. And so there was 3 teams, and one of the groups was going over and working with the coaches, and 2 of them were playing a game with me. And one of the teams said, "Oh, can we go and explain the rules to the team that comes on?" I said, "Yeah, of course you can." And they said, "Can we tell them the wrong rules?" I said, "Yeah, of course you can." So every team that came on got told the wrong rules of the game. And then they had to solve the problem, work out the game, and adapt. And it was brilliant just to see kids solving problems. I just thought, what a great way to actually give them lots of really incorrect information to hopefully work to your advantage, and then watch them. And then I would talk to the kids and go, well, when you give them the wrong information, which players do you think are going to solve it? how quickly do you think they'll solve it? Do you think they'll pass the information on to other people? Because that's, the best players in the future are all going to be doing that. They're going to be coaches on the pitch, basically.
Yeah, and they're going to be, and for me, what I've always said about being a coach for me has been around the idea of being able to analyse and then being able to solve problems based on your analytical skills. And actually, that's ultimately what you want the players to be able to do, is to take in the information and solve the problems. I mean, I do something quite similar, which is I quite often I'll throw in secret rules. So I'll just say to them, right, there's a secret rule in this next game. You've got to try and work out what that rule is. And like, for example, one of the rules I'll use is, so what you often get in hockey is players will sort of, kind of pass back to wherever the ball's just come from. Sometimes out of just purely automatic, or purely because they see there's an obvious kind of opportunity for space there, and they haven't made themselves aware of any other opportunities. More often than not, they're just putting the ball back into an area of congestion, and we want them to explore getting the ball into areas of space. So the secret rule I call the Elvis rule, no return to sender. And they have to work it out. They have to work out what that rule is. They've cottoned onto it now, so I've got to come up with some new secret rules. But I do that quite a lot just because I want to see if they can, firstly, work out what the rule is, and then secondly, communicate it to their teammates without the opponents finding out.
Yeah, and that's, with due respect, if the players are as good at problem solvers as I was, then that's not good enough. So, and probably the same for you. The reason, we haven't, they just need to be better players than me. And I would be really mindful of who I give information to. So I might give it to one person in the middle of the game and say, look, you're not allowed to shout, but you need to get that information out as effectively as you possibly can. I might tell one kid who's really good that your goal in the next 5 minutes is to help the two new kids score tries. But you can't tell them because it's just a different problem then. If we tell everyone there's two new kids and Johnny's trying to get tries for them, then I'm not sure how the two new kids would feel about it. And it's just a different problem. So we had a player in the program last year who would be pretty good defender in terms of he's really quick, so push people to an edge and tackle them. He wasn't really thinking about, going and hitting people man and ball. He definitely wasn't thinking intercepts. So another classic for coaches is, well, intercepts are risky. I'm thinking intercepts are the easiest way to score a try. So I look at Sale at the weekend. They scored 3 tries of intercepts. They won a game with 34% possession, very little territory. So I'm definitely scoring intercepts. So I say to Ben, to the kid Ben, I said, look, I just grab him on the way to the pitch and say, look, if you get 5 intercepts in this session, then all the coaches will do 20 press-ups. And by the way, apparently kids love adults doing press-ups. It's the biggest incentive. And so there's a problem, but no, and I said, you can't tell anyone. Well, he gets 2 in 2 minutes. So I then need to tell everyone because it's actually too easy for him. So I then say, look, Ben's trying to get this. And if he gets them, all of us will do 20 press-ups. So I'm always mindful of who I give information to because, it's a bit like the England-Italy game where Italy defend like this. Well, coaches will run a session and they'll tell everyone. Well, no one told England. And the reason it's such an amazing game to watch is because no one told England. Whereas if everyone had told England, then it would have been fine. We could have planned it. We could have gone, we'll do this, this and this. But then we wouldn't have had the theatre that we had. So, and the same when I ask ex-players, did you ever do training sessions where one team knew a rule and you had to work it out, solve the problem on the pitch? And it's a resounding no. So we need to train more like that.
Do you? Where do you stand on this? Because I see a lot of coaching sessions where, for example, apparently the whiteboard on the side of the pitch in a training session is the thing to do now. Great big flip chart. You've got to lug it out there, and then you've written out everything that's going to be done in the session, or you're explicit at the start with the group of players and say to them, right, this is the session, this is what we're working on, these are the themes, this is everything else. I'm quite often not that explicit. I want them to, by the end, tell me what is it we were working on today. And I think it's an interesting test because if the game forms, if the the kind of sort of constrained exercises I've done, if they work in the way I'm hoping and they draw awareness that I'm looking for them to draw, then the players should be able to tell me what it is that the theme that they were working on, because they should have sort of tweaked onto it. Obviously, there's going to be some questioning and things going on through that session, but I don't know how I feel about being explicit at the start about what the session is about.
I'm rarely explicit. However, what we would say I would want the players to have some input into what the session might look like. However, especially if you go into, so I dropped into Harrow yesterday. Well, the session's based upon the needs of the players. So I rock up and actually don't know what their needs are. So let's start off and see where we end up. We've been using whiteboards, so I went to Teddy's Oxford the other day, and the kids were get into groups of 3 or 4, talk about what your super strength, with similar super strengths, set yourselves a challenge. And so, for example, 4 of the guys were first one to get 3 kick to scores and 5 fix the ball, got a school lunch served to him by the other 3. So just to create games within games, so I would use it for that, and I would give them ownership of that. It's also quite interesting. It's easier in the England environment because most of those players have got individual development plans, and they would know what are they trying to get better at. And for me, an individual development plan should be put into a session. And so there's a really good way of using a whiteboard that you've lugged out. We would rarely be that explicit around what the session looks like, although if a kid came up to us beforehand and said, look, what's in the session, because this is what I'm looking to work on, then we would definitely share that information. And that would be, we would expect, a lot of our players would do that pre-session anyway, come up and go, look, what's the focus of the session? Cool, I'm trying to do this. And we would, I'm always mindful. I mean, if you call a session a defence session, then attack don't really try and score. Everyone focuses on the defence, or attack score and then they get told off by the defence coach. Or the defence coach has 15 defenders against 10 attackers because we just want success. Or if you call a session a team run, it basically just becomes a unopposed, session that's nothing like the game. So it's really not a team run, if I'm honest, because it's nothing like the game. So I would be mindful about what I call a session. But yeah, we would be the same as you. I would be relatively comfortable that we're going to run some kind of game activity, and if we feel like we need to pull people out, we might do that. However, I'm thinking that we're all playing this game, but within the game, everyone's individually playing a different game. So Stuart might be really good at kicking off his right foot. Well, Stuart's getting double points if he kicks to score off his left foot. And Stuart might be really good at getting intercepts. So Stuart's challenge is to make 4 other players get intercepts. So I'm using you as a coach. So I'm not saying Stuart's got to get 4 intercepts. I'm saying Stuart's challenge is to get 4 other players to be as good as him at intercepting. So whilst we're playing a game, everyone's playing a different game. And I'm not saying that's easy, by the way. So often, especially in a new environment where you don't know players. So Teddy's the other day. Well, an easier way for me to do that is to put a whiteboard next to the pitch and go, lads, set yourselves some challenges, and I can have a look at them and go, okay, cool, why have you picked that? What are you thinking with that? Is there another way of doing that? Oh, well, this group are trying to do this, so I'm going to tell the rest of the group they're trying to do it, because your job is to try and stop them. And we're just creating lots of games within games.
Brilliant. I mean, I think that's a fantastic concept that I think a lot of people will take away, the idea of games within games. I mean, this brings me back to something I wanted to ask you about, something you mentioned earlier about coaching freedom. And I entirely agree with you. I think there is a fantastic amount of freedom and actually, funnily enough, creativity that you can bring to your coaching, because I think you have to use your Google mess up cards, because you have to recognize that you're going to do things and you're not going to get the intended consequence that you were expecting. So therefore you've got, you don't have to adapt, and then you probably find something better because of the adaptation. And then you've got something else that you can then use in the future. And that process of learning is really important. Now, I think some people find that quite scary, particularly in the early stages of their coaching career, because it's like, well, I don't know what I don't know. I've got there's too many things I can do. It's almost like going back to your point about the kid who's on an E asking for an A, because it's a bit of overwhelm. So if you were speaking to somebody who was at the start of their coaching journey, and there's quite a lot of people who do tune into this who are at the start of their coaching journey, what advice would you give them in terms of taking their first steps to working in this way, ripping up the recipe cards and actually starting to work in a much more method approach, a bit more experimental? You're obviously going to have some bad food, but you're going to get some really good stuff out of it as well. So how would you guide somebody in that space?
I would get them on the Magic Academy with immediate effect. I think learning from people around you, it can often feel quite an isolated job being a coach. One of the things that the biggest feedback we get from Magic is that I thought I was the only person who's having these problems and trying this stuff and getting this kind of stuff from my senior leaders. And so they feel a certain sense of relatedness and belonging. And I would go and observe other people. I would go and learn off them. I would. There are resources out there. There's some pretty, there's a wealth of resources. I would listen to your podcasts. I would, follow some influential people on Twitter. I would just go out there and try. I would bring the kids into the process as well, and I would involve the parents, just because if you don't, you can often feel them against you. Even at Old Bristolians under 14s, informing the kids and influencing the parents and talking about, well, it's going to look like this, and this is why has really helped. Even for me, it was a little bit stressful to start with. And just go and coach, and just go and get in lots of different environments, coach different ages, coach different sexes, coach different abilities, coach different sports. Because it's tough. Because if you're a Sunday morning dad and you coach, say there's another couple of coaches, and you maybe get half an hour a week. Well, over a year, that's not a huge amount of time to coach. So, without that deliberate practice, how do you get better? I would reflect. I would go, well, how can we do that better? I would ask players, what was your best bit? How hard did you find that? How could I do it better? I would be willing to be vulnerable and learn. It's not going to happen overnight, is it?
No.
Why would you think?
Well, it's interesting, because the reason I asked the question is because I think there's a concern. So, for example, I've watched you at work, and I think if somebody who's uninitiated watches you at work, they don't think it's coaching. They think, because they're expecting to see instruction, direction, order, probably some repetitive, isolated practices. That's what a common conception of what coaching is. Your approach, or our approach, let's say, feels to the participant and to an observer, an uninitiated observer, it feels like there's not actually any coaching taking place at all, because there's very little or much less explicit engagement with individuals going on. So from an observer's perspective, it doesn't feel or look like coaching. So how do you navigate that? Because I think some people, particularly when they're new into this, they sort of can't find the balance point. I see a lot of coaching on a regular basis, at my club and everywhere else, where what we've got now is these kids playing games. And that's it. They just play a game. A small-sided game, yes. Maybe a game with some rules attached, but they just play a game. And I don't think it's that rich with learning, because it hasn't got all the other layers that you've thrown into this. So how do you navigate? That's probably two questions in one, but how do you navigate all that? And
what I would say is lots of the best players in the world just play games with their mates. For long periods of time, and it definitely had some impact. However, I agree it could be significantly richer. And possibly how we deliver our coach development reflects that more now, so it would be much more around. So, for example, I'm going to one on Sunday and going to do some stuff with some coaches, and they're going to send me their session plan, so to say. We're going to have some questions, we're going to bounce it around. I'm going to say, well, look, how can I best support you? Is that on the pitch setting challenges? Is that what is it? And we're doing much more of that collaboratively, and we're getting the people to coach, and we're working alongside them. And then we'll reflect on it. And it's, we're not going to change the world. And by the way, I'm still learning how to coach. So I'm not, by no way am I saying I'm the finished article. However, I do want to be the best coach in the world. I mean, I definitely don't see any point doing it if I wouldn't want to be that. And then by that, I mean coach of coaches and coach of players. We're probably a bit more informal. So we just had a lot of guys up in the England 18s camp, and they're asking questions. They're on the pitch. We're grabbing coffees. We're talking about what does it mean in your context. We're trying to go into other people's context. So last year with Gloucester, we had a coach development session, and one guy put his hand up and he goes, "Look, this wouldn't work in my club. It's completely different." We were like, "Brilliant. Let's go in your club in a month and let's go do this." So he sent me his session plan. We then talked about, well, have you thought about this? Is the better way of doing this? And we just iterate and we talk about, well, why would you make a decision like that? Why would you do this? Why wouldn't you do this? We talk a lot about the how skills and interventions. I do really feel there's a real surge of people who are doing brilliant stuff, and they are influencing other people. So the stuff with the ACDOs, soon to be called ACWs. For example, next week we're at, is it next week, 18th, we're at Bedford Modern School. Brett Richmond, who's doing some cool stuff, has just said, well, we're going to have a Magic Academy meet at Bedford School. And we've got coaches coming, we've got psychologists, we've got some kids there, and we're going to go, well, yeah, what are the needs, what are your problems, and let's look at some solutions. And that much more informal stuff, rather than there's a curriculum, and there's these competencies that you have to be able to tick off. Just helping coaches on a much more individual level, and yeah, it's definitely harder, but I really feel like we're having huge impact.
Fantastic. I mean, I think that's a great place for us to sort of draw a conclusion to the conversation. I mean, I know we could talk for hours about this, and I've really enjoyed the conversation. The time's absolutely flown by, but there's loads in there that I think people should be able to take away. It's one of those I think people might have to listen to a couple of times. I'm certainly going to be listening back to it myself. I hate listening to my own voice, but certainly you've been dropping knowledge bomb after knowledge bomb, knowledge cluster bombs, I reckon I'm going to call them.
Yeah, strong. I'm enjoying that.
So, hey, how can people? You mentioned the Magic Academy. That's on Edufii, isn't it?
Yeah. So what? I think what we recognised probably at the start of this year was that we needed an informal sharing space for coaches, so where they could feel connected, where they could engage with other coaches from. There's Premiership coaches, there's international coaches, there's top 14 coaches, there's Sunday morning dads and mums, there's psychologists, there's people from other sports. So we've now got 1,300 coaches. It's completely free. People will go on there, they'll interact, they'll go, oh, can I come and have a look at that in your environment? And it just leads to much more collaboration and sharing. And, there's this, that's why I talk about this surge of people who are actually doing some brilliant stuff. And I'm learning loads off them. So, I definitely can't claim all the knowledge cluster bombs I've just dropped. Some of them are definitely from other people. So if you email me, Russell Earnshaw, RUSSELL Earnshaw at rfu.com, and then I invite you, and there you go. You're a wizard. You get to go and weave some spells.
Fantastic. I like the idea of coaching as being, kind of creating some spells and to see how we can bewitch these young players and help them develop as a process. I like that concept. Is what I'm going to be exploring myself.
I mean, look, we need to inspire kids. We need them to fall in love with sports and all the reasons we fell in love with sport. And we need to think of being like the people that inspired us the most. So all your listeners will be able to think of the one or two coaches that, or adults or teachers or mentors or whoever it is that believed in them or changed their life or showed them what was possible. And that's how I think coaches should see the world. And genuinely, there's some super inspirational coaches out there who are doing stuff way better than I could ever imagine. And, and genuinely changing people's lives. And, That's the cool stuff.
Awesome. I've got an idea for you. You might be way ahead of me on this, but I reckon the person who makes sort of the most valuable contributions in the Magic Academy should get a pointy wizard's hat at the end of the year.
There's actually a guy in the Magic Academy whose name is Merlin, and that's his real name. So Merlin O'Donnell, I thought he changed his name so he could, get into them. But yeah, so that's a good idea. I'll bear that one in mind.
Awesome stuff. Right, Rusty, that's been amazing. Thank you very much for your time. I'm glad we could get this conversation done, and I think there's going to be loads in that, and I'm pretty certain we're going to get a lot of questions, and it may well be we have to do a part 2 if you'd be up for it.
Yeah, awesome. I'll just have to get through my 1,600 emails per month, and we'll be fine with that one.
There you go. All right. Thanks a lot. Speak to you again.
Cheers, mate. Bye.